Hi, I'm Laura. Welcome back to my channel. I'm a fourth year medical student, and in today's video we're going to be talking about medical school interviews, or more specifically the MMIs, the multiple mini interview style format. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe down below to keep up to date with all of my videos. So a little bit of backstory, I underwent 2 different interviews at 2 different universities back in 2018. Both of them used the MMI format, so that's what I'm going to be chatting about today. I didn't have to worry about preparing for a panel interview, which can be quite different to the MMIs. So if the whole concept of MMIs is completely new to you, for a general overview there's typically 8 stations. With each station you're allocated 10 minutes, so you'll have 2 minutes reading time. So if they're in person, prior to walking into the room there'll be a piece of paper explaining a scenario blue tacked to the door, and you'll stand there for 2 minutes, read through the scenario so that you walk into the room knowing what to expect. If your interviews are being conducted online, they'll generally share their screen with a Word document with the same information. So after the 2 minutes reading time, you walk into the room and you have 8 minutes to go through the station. Now the stations can be on a whole different range of things, and we'll get to that in just a second. But in a nutshell, you'll be presented with a variety of questions from which you'll generally be scored on a scale from 1 to 7, with 1 being the worst and 7 being the best. Following your 8 minutes in the station, you'll be moved on to the next station and go straight into your 2 minutes reading time. With one of my medical interviews, we had a rest station because there was 9 students in my session. So luckily mine fell exactly halfway through, which was really nice to get a bit of a reprieve for 10 minutes. But otherwise the MMIs can be quite draining, so it's really important that you're practicing for them and know what to expect. The types of stations you can expect to encounter do vary between universities, but there's some general themes that are pretty consistent throughout. One of those general themes is your motivations for studying medicine. In this station, it's basically a very condensed version of a panel interview where they'll ask you, why do you want to study medicine? Why medicine instead of nursing or an allied health degree? What steps have you taken to ensure that you will actually really enjoy a career in medicine? Have you given any consideration to specialty training? And more questions along those lines. Because those types of stations are quite common, you should be prepared with really good answers for them, and we'll get into how you structure a good answer in just a little bit. Another type of station you might encounter is a role play. I think it's important to consider the MMIs as a whole, almost as if you're acting for every station. And by that I don't mean that you're pretending or you're being fake. I mean that you're actively expressing all of your emotions, because in the moment you're likely to be really nervous, and when we get nervous we tend to wall off and restrict our facial expressions a little bit. So feeling as if you're going over the top is okay in the medical interviews, especially in the role play scenarios. In a role play you walk in and generally you'll be required to either resolve a conflict or deal with someone who's really upset. Now you're not expected to be perfect at either of these. What they're looking to see is empathy. And what you'll hear more than anything else when you're preparing for medical interviews is that you need to be able to express empathy and demonstrate empathy. And I think because of that, how to be empathetic is probably worthy of its own video. So I won't go into too much depth now, but what that would entail is just really connecting with the person, connect with the scenario, try and forget that you're in a medical school interview, try and fully immerse yourself in the story that they've created for you, and really respond how you would in real life. At the end of the day, in every station, at every medical school, they're looking for people with beautiful demeanors who are going to make really good doctors. If you can convey that part of yourself, then you shouldn't have an issue. There may also be a station requiring you to read a highly scientific passage. They might ask you to summarize it or to answer questions about it. You might have to explain it in layman's terms, all of which can be a bit tricky if you haven't had much experience reading medical literature before. I think a key point in this station type is if you are asked a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to say that you don't know. Generally, you'll be able to refer back to the stimulus. If you still can't find an answer, tell them what you would do to find an answer for the question, but let them know at this point in time you're not sure. Because I have heard of scenarios where they will ask questions that aren't covered in the stimulus to see if you're confident enough to front up and say that you don't know and own uncertainty, because that is also another big part of being a doctor. We don't always have the answers. You might be engaged in ethical conversations Hot topics at the moment are vaccine mandates, assisted dying, and government initiatives around people who inject drugs. Really to make sure that you always have the best interest of everyone in mind, that you're not going to single out a subtype of the population or stereotype people on practices they may engage in or conditions that they may have, that you're open-minded and optimistic and willing to see the best in people. There may be a station asking you to interpret graphs. Generally, these won't just be your simple run-of-the-mill graphs. They'll be 3-axis, there'll be a lot of information on there, and they won't give you that much time to really understand the graphs. So that reading skill is really important to practice. I also had a station at one of my interviews that tested multitasking. So I was having to solve a puzzle and continuously flip a sand timer and answer questions at the same time. That was a bit strange, and not every uni does that, but it's something that you can prepare for as well, so be mindful of that. It's highly likely there will be a station that asks you to make a choice. This may be medically related. It could be choosing between 2 job offers at different hospitals in different locations, each with their own pros and cons, and asking you to justify your reasons behind that. Or it may also be incorporated into a role play type situation, asking you to make a choice on patient care. For example, you may be a transplant surgeon with 2 patients on your waiting list, and you'll be asked to choose which one you would assign the donated organ to and why. All of these are assessing your decision-making process and making sure that you're not too impulsive or likely to jump to conclusions. And the last station type that I had was watching a video of a doctor and a patient and answering questions around what I thought of the interaction, what the doctor did well, what they could have improved upon, how the patient responded, and things along those lines. In terms of the themes for the interview, they generally are quite consistent. Some of the things they'll get you to talk about are your involvement in the community, your volunteering experience, conflict resolution, teamwork, instances in which you've displayed initiative, academic integrity, getting your personal views and opinions on different issues, demonstrating empathy, and assessing how you would approach a problem. So that sums up what the MMI process is. Now I'll delve into some tips on how I prepared and also how I approached the interviews on the day. One of the main points that I'd like you to take away from this video is that everyone undertaking medical interviews are academically capable of becoming doctors. What they're looking for though is good people to become doctors. A big part of the way of how you're selected into medical school is by offering the panel something that no one else can. And you have to do this by being your true authentic self and exploiting any uniqueness that you may have and crafting this narrative of yourself and your life that no one else could copy. That you would be able to bring something new, something different to the medical profession. And the best way to do that in medical school interviews is by providing insight into your life outside of your academic exploits. This can seem a little daunting and almost a little counterintuitive. Obviously, you want them to know that you're intelligent and have received amazing academic accolades to back that up. But everyone's smart, and if you try and sell that narrative, there's 600 other people doing exactly the same thing and they'll get bored. Really exploit what makes you unique. And some examples of what I mean by that: at my medical school interviews, I spoke about how I came from a rural community, that I was really involved in student welfare activities in my senior years after we'd lost a few people in our school community, unfortunately, to suicide. I was a competitive gymnast for 10 years. I enjoyed music and traveling. No one else in my family had even worked in the medical field, let alone as a doctor. I had a part-time job in a hardware store. All things that I knew no one else would be telling stories about on the day of the interviews, which is exactly what you want. Don't forget that these interviewers are asking the same questions day in and day out to every single applicant. You want to say something that piques their interest. And the best way of doing that, and the best way of preparing for the interviews in general, is sitting down and coming up with anecdotes relating to your life for all different types of circumstances. What's a really good story of a time when you've displayed initiative? What's a conflict that you've resolved and how did you do it? When have you displayed teamwork? When have cultural barriers been an issue for you and how did you overcome them? We all have these life experiences, but it's not until you sit down and really give it some thought that you'll come up with examples, possibly from years ago that you'd almost forgotten about, that are absolutely fantastic. You basically want to end up with an anecdote toolbox, something that gives you the opportunity to personalize every question that you're asked. Make it interesting, make it unique. Don't bore the interviewers with the same answers that they've heard for the last 7 hours straight. It's probably important to note that the examiners are instructed not to give away anything. There will be no facial expressions, no laughter, no typical responses. Don't be put off by this either. If your stories are good and engaging, you don't need to worry about what the examiner's looking like. Also, make sure you don't second guess yourself. Now, this is completely different to realizing that you're wrong and correcting yourself, but there could be instances and situations in which the examiner will prompt you with something like, "Oh, are you sure?" If you are sure, then stick by your word. They're testing you and they're testing your confidence and seeing how you react in high pressure situations, seeing if you can be swayed. Don't let them sway you. Okay, so after all that talk about making yourself unique and making your narrative stand out above everyone else's, it's also important to keep in mind that this is a very time-pressured interview. So when you're answering questions, don't add in too much unnecessary waffle. When you're asked a question, give them an answer with a topic sentence first and then go on to elaborate. Some stations may be asking between 4 and 8 questions, so the examiners will cut you off. Also, don't be offended by this. It's completely okay. But you need to make sure that they're aware of the key points in your answer. I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's not a primetime TV drama. Don't leave them hanging until the last second when you have a really good point to make. It's also really important to try and remember the question and stay on track, which sounds very obvious, but when you're nervous and caught up in the moment, especially when you're bringing personal anecdotes into it, it's easy to lose your way. And the best way to make sure that that doesn't happen is with lots of practice. A few other random suggestions I'd like to make. If you can pick your interview time, try and pick the first session. They've done studies to show that on long interview days, those that are interviewed in the morning on average end up with better scores than those interviewed in the afternoon. Now, it's not to say that if you're stuck with an afternoon interview time, you're destined for a terrible score. Just keep it interesting with the anecdotes and you'll be fine. But if you do get to preference, go in the morning. If you're the first person that they see in the morning, they will remember you. What you wear can also have a really big impact, so make sure that you're dressing appropriately. Wear something comfortable but professional. If you have the opportunity, make it memorable. Wear a red tie or an emerald green pantsuit. Most people will be showing up in black and white and navy, which is completely okay and very professional. But if you have the confidence, wear a little bit of color because that will help you stand out as well. You also want to focus on the way that you're speaking. Make sure you've got nice, smooth speech at a good rate and a good volume, all of which is extremely difficult when you're nervous, but this is why you really need to practice. And speak confidently. You've made it this far. Clearly the university is interested in you. So now it's your time to have a little bit of faith in yourself and really sell it. So that brings us to the end of today's video. I will be doing another one on how to express empathy in medical interviews and going into the nuances of how to answer questions a little bit more. But as for now, I'd like you to go away and start thinking about those personal anecdotes. Google MMI questions and have your family members ask them to you. I'd also really recommend videoing any practice that you do, because let me tell you that things look a lot different than they feel. So you want to be critically analysing your body language and your intonation and your expression and working on that now so that come interviews you don't have to think about anything. Okay, that's all for now. I hope you have a lovely afternoon and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.